The original Game Boy had a very odd relationship with fighting games. Until SNK saved the day by bringing their franchises to the system, it seemed like we were fated to be stuck with miserable shells of games that only vaguely resembled their home console namesakes. All but a small handful suffered from the same issues: stuttering, unintelligible character sprites, infuriatingly unresponsive controls, and minuscule character movesets, if there was any difference between fighters' moves at all. One of the only real standouts was Mortal Kombat 2, a game that took the operable but Spartan MK1's framework and at least made it a bit better. It was nowhere near perfect, but Probe and Acclaim at least managed to crank out a semi-fun experience. Then, good old Software Creations took over the development reins, and the whole thing completely fell apart with the third one. The graphics were somehow worse and the frame rate even lower, the movesets reduced further and fatalities even more difficult to pull off. MK3 was a miserable experience that firmly dashed any hopes we had of them capitalizing on the upward trajectory between the first two. Never fear though, because by 1998, the Game Boy Color was out with its full color display and increased potential processing power. Surely the fourth entry in the series would see the ship rewrited, right? A slight tangent for a second. Looking at GameFAQs, yeah, I still do that, shows the entry for this particular game has actually been separated from all the home console versions of MK4, which usually means it's not the same game and can give you a good idea what the source material for ports to Game Boy was. Look at how they delineate the two Aladdin games, for example, where the Game Boy one takes after the Mega Drive and the Game Boy Advance one takes after the Super Nintendo. Here, the N64, Dreamcast, PlayStation, so on and so forth, are all coupled together under the main Mortal Kombat 4 entry. The Game Boy Color version is special. It gets its own lovely little page all to itself. Through my experience using this site for review research, I can tell you that's not usually a good thing. Digital Eclipse, yes, them again, were on dev duty, and as soon as you start playing, you immediately understand why the venerable online gaming database GameFAQs makes the distinction. Whereas MK4 on console represented a step up from the original 16-bit trilogy into a whole new generation of improved console, the Game Boy one, despite now being colorized and on a stronger machine, somehow managed to step backwards. It's baffling how this was achieved, to make a game that was worse than the third one. But you know you can always rely on Digital Eclipse to pull off such a feat. This isn't really even a port by this point. It feels like a reworking of the third one with new characters and an unfinished coat of paint that looks like what would happen if you asked your 5-year-old to decorate the living room for you. You know that ain't getting finished correctly. The sprite work is incredibly amateurish and the colorization has little to no texturing anywhere. Fatalities are the worst though. Rather than having the in-game animations that even the earlier GB games managed, now what you get is a super duper compressed cutscene from the N64 version. The characters silhouetted in monochrome to try and mask the fact that what you're looking at isn't representative of the characters in the fight. You get a fatality after a fashion, but it'll more than likely not be the fighter you're controlling or the one you're up against that you see in this animation. One of them even sees Johnny Cage being killed, a character not even in the Game Boy Color version. I know Digital Eclipse had this technology that they were super proud of, where they could quite quickly downgrade console graphics and get them to sort of run on the Game Boy, which goes some way to explain A, the quickness at which they could grind these games out, and B, why they got so many of the bloody things. But to be this blasé about Mortal Kombat's most defining game mechanic is just embarrassing. If you're not going to put the effort into programming proper fatalities, just don't bother trying to do Mortal Kombat. Have some integrity in what you're doing, right? Not that it really matters, I suppose. The controls are so shite you probably won't pull them off anyway. Aside from that, the movesets your fighters have is so limited. Yes, there are only 2 buttons that are realistic to use, but it's been done plenty of times before. Each character only has maybe 2 unique moves that are super hard to pull off. It doesn't encourage you to want to get good at any character or even pick a favorite. They all play the same, and the AI is either dumber than a sack of hammers or some telepathic ninja that predicts your every move. There's no in between. You'll be remorselessly kicking the first 2 or 3 opponents in the face with alarming ease, only for the next to have a counter to everything you attempt. They seem to know your moves even before you do. Let's talk about the sound quality for a minute as well, because the first thing the back of the box claims is in-game speech. Mortal Kombat 4 for the Game Boy is one of the few games to offer this great new feature. Firstly, no it isn't. Secondly, it's not that great a feature. And thirdly, that's your main selling point? Okay, the speech is pretty good as it goes, but that does not make up for how awful the rest of the audio is. Let me turn this up for you for a minute. It's like that all the way through. The box then goes on to say, watch as brand new and classic fatalities take on a completely different meaning in full motion video. That ain't full motion. Look at it, it's barely even stop motion. And take on a completely different meaning? Not, it's better this way, or yeah, we think it's been implemented really well, honest, but more like, well, we did say it was different. I mean, if I picked this up off the shelf in the video game store, there's no way I'd be dropping my pocket money on it based on those blurbs. Like, I know on the back of the box they're supposed to exaggerate the game's qualities a bit, and you have to be a bit immune to that, but they didn't even bother hyping it up here. It's as if they knew it sucked. Honestly though, the terrible presentation really doesn't matter a jot. It's just a tired veneer haphazardly thrown onto a port that barely even qualifies to be called such. Maybe that's why it was separated on the internet, because it wasn't a port. Nothing's been improved here. Voices were added at the expense of decent fighting sounds and music. Color was added at the expense of decent graphical design, when you'd think the two things shouldn't be mutually exclusive. The controls are worse than any of the previous 3 Mortal Kombat entries, and that's the most mind-boggling part of it. That shouldn't have been possible. And where the hell is the multiplayer feature, by the way? Not only does this blow chunks, but I can't even link cable with someone to share the pain? Everyone involved should be frickin' ashamed of themselves.